Butcher Boy PSA Sitch here with another Sunday live stream with everyone's favorite Friended Forever. And today we'll be talking with James Lindsay about the many struggles he's faced with his studies. James, what's going on today? I know that you're in a not the best mood today.
Yeah, I'm having tech issues, so everything else is all right.
So Adam, what's going on here?
I put together some discussion questions for us. I'm super interested in your work just because I do a lot of debates and stuff with anti-theists. And Sitch and I actually asked before the stream started, we were talking before you came on, James, about whether or not you were an anti-theist. Would you call yourself an anti-theist?
I would have a few years ago. I don't think so now.
Has the...
Not something I really think's worth getting into. Not like to talk about here, but as an activity to get into anymore. I know a lot of the people that used to pay attention to me for atheist type stuff and I guess anti-theist type stuff would be disappointed to hear that. But I just don't see it as being wholly productive any longer, and really don't involve myself in.
Did we lose you, James? Or did you lose me?
No, James looks like he's froze a bit here. James, can you hear us?
I guess we'll see if he comes back or not. See what happens. Yeah, because I'm wondering if he went through the same evolution that you went through, where this kind of the social justice stuff woke you up to the need for maybe having some sort of alternative, or no, the danger of getting rid of religion with no alternative.
Yeah, see, I never saw James as an anti-theist. Like, he did this talk in 2016 where he was really trying to tell the atheist community that the anti-theist thing wasn't a fruitful direction. And that's kind of how I discovered James. So I always thought he was kind of like not really on the anti-theist team. So
I was just looking at some of his because he wrote a book, I think, that was about trying to debunk the idea about God and infinity and how, like, whatever, I don't know, we probably shouldn't get into it if he's not going to be here.
Yeah, I think he dropped out. He'll be back in a sec. Sorry, guys.
Sorry.
If you want, if you have any questions for James, I guess Sitch has eyes on the chat, but
yeah. We also were going to watch a short clip of a video from a YouTuber named Big Joel, who declared the death of YouTube skepticism, and it's this completely absurd video, which mostly is about Blair White. Even despite the headline implying it's, the anti-SJW YouTubers. But we're going to look at a piece of that because he claims we don't address some questions that Jordan Peterson basically addresses every single time he's interviewed. So we'll do that after. Or maybe we'll do that now.
Yeah.
The death of YouTube skepticism. He said it's this completely absurd video. Which mostly... He said what?
Yeah, he said his internet went out, so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, now he's back.
Hey, so I told you I was having tech issues today.
It's one of those days where just everything's hitting you at once, huh?
Dude, I know. It's like I'm not having tech issues with my Wi-Fi till I get on a live stream. No, it's just, so I'm in East Tennessee, and in the Southeast, it's just like this, especially this time of year. Late summer or late all through June really and into July. It's just we have thunderstorms 2 or 3 times a day every day here, and our internet and electricity are somewhat unstable as a result.
I actually lived in New Orleans for a while, and I discovered that the rainy season is actually the summertime, which is kind of crazy.
Oh yeah,
like
it rains every day.
It gets super hot and humid during the summertime, and everybody goes jogging in the rain because it's so hot that it's like it cools you off. So
yeah, so hopefully this will work this time. I don't know what'll happen.
That's cool.
We'll
I
see.
didn't want to get you in trouble. It seemed like you had some trepidation about saying
No,
whether or not
no.
you were an anti-theist. I
No,
myself am not
I didn't expect the question. I'm good. I'm not nervous to answer it. I just don't know exactly how to answer it. It really took me off guard.
Well, I was telling Sitch before we started that I really discovered your work. People keep sending me this talk you did in 2016 where you talk about ending atheism, and you seemed very like you were trying to tell the atheist community that this anti-theist route they were going down was not really going to be a successful thing. So,
yeah, so that followed off of a book I wrote the previous year, 2015, called "Everybody's Wrong About God," and I realized, I guess, really a couple of years before that, takes a little while to write and publish a book. I realized a little bit before that, maybe 2013 and early 14. That what was going on with atheist activism just wasn't. It's not going to succeed, and that's not exactly right. To the degree that it could succeed, it already had and was no longer relevant, and so it needed to enter a new phase that stopped trying to be so anti-theistic. So in that sense, I've definitely dropped. I mean, I'm consistent with what I wrote. I've dropped the whole anti-theistic thing more or less entirely since.
yeah, and the things that you're talking about around these hoax papers, and I like to think of it more as an audit, because really I feel like the hoax, like calling it a hoax, I think does us a disservice, because what I feel that you were really doing was like auditing these different studies, these what you call grievance studies. But I think your talks about this audit that you did was a lot of the ideas that you encountered in critical theory, you're saying are kind of religious-like ideas, correct?
Yeah, totally. It's really kind of funny because I feel like I'm kind of kicking off an atheist 2.0 movement or something, but not, that's like a thing, but not the same thing. Probably the best way to put it is that all of this, whether philosophers want to try to pick at it or not, is ultimately postmodern. That's what Helen and I are writing a book about right now, is showing the postmodern foundations and methods of social justice. And probably the biggest way or best way to look at it is that the original postmodernism, which is known for being very deconstructive and for taking things apart, took apart all of the old religions. And I use that phrase very broadly. They call the meta-narratives, which are grand sweeping explanations for how things work. So religions give you a meta-narrative or operate on a meta-narrative. You have, societal meta-narratives like American exceptionalism might be one, or manifest destiny would have been one while we were doing, the conquering of North America. What's it called? The French had another one for colonialism that had to do with basically the civilizing mission of European powers. And so you have these ideas. Others are like Marxism, capitalism. In a sense, you could say scientism as a kind of an ideology built up around science would constitute a meta-narrative that science will be and can be the only explanation for everything. But science itself is not. This is something that postmodernists got wrong. And so what they did was they tore apart all of these grand sweeping explanations. And what's happened in the 4 to 5 decades since is the people who have followed in those footsteps have realized that things that have been torn apart completely aren't really useful for anything. So if you want to achieve things, you have to start putting things back together or building something in their place. And so they tore down the old religions and they've built a new one in its place, a new set of unquestionable assumptions that operate at a mythological level and describe how society and everything in it works. It's held to with a very religious type of architecture, and it appeals to a very religious type of psychology.
So my understanding is that our religious structures have gone through this kind of evolutionary cycle, this cultural evolution cycle. And I think that the idea that we could put together some kind of religion or substitute for religion, and get everything right that religion has gotten right over the thousands and thousands of years of this kind of product cycle or evolutionary cultural evolution product cycle seems bizarre to me. And sometimes I like a lot of your talks on this topic because you're conceptualizing the critical theory stuff as that kind of trying to replace the religious instinct in certain people. But the idea that like this can work out well the first time out seems like that. The idea of that happening seems crazy to me. Do you have any thoughts on like they're trying to kind of form like a social relationship around this stuff, correct?
Right. So it's not quite right to say that they're trying to replace the religion. It's in fact, or that they're even trying to build a religion. I don't think they realize that that's what they're doing. It's that they have built up a meta-narrative that explains how the world works. Another way to explain a meta-narrative would be a social or cultural mythology for how the world works and how people fit in society. And they have started to organize communities around this. And you are correct to say that religions do the same thing and have done the same thing and have been subjected to the processes of evolution through culture by stamping out what doesn't work over time and keeping what has worked or what force will make work, and depending on the situation. And of course, it's very unlikely that the things that are coming out in this kind of nascent attempt to form a community structure around the postmodern meta-narrative is going to work out successfully without a good bit of pruning through the processes of cultural evolution. In particular, what's come out, as often comes out in the evolution of religions, either early on or at certain times later, is a bent toward fundamentalism that's enforced with authoritarian thought and activity. And that unless it gains total power, usually doesn't last very long because nobody likes it and it doesn't attract people. The heart goes where freedom is, and freedom isn't where you're wrong for everything you do and everybody's getting canceled or whatever else. So I don't think that it's likely to succeed as a object in culture in the long term as it is now because of that. But philosophically, I also don't think it's likely to last very long because it's so internally fractured and inconsistent and contradictory that it keeps people feeling very unsteady. That's great when you're trying to control people or manipulate them in some way because they don't know what the rules are and they find themselves constantly on the wrong side of those. But it doesn't work out very long once people decide that they don't want to play that game anymore and they just ignore you when you try to put it out. So I don't think it's going real well for them, but they have amassed a lot of cultural influence and a lot of power at the moment.
So why do you think it's taken off so much this time? Because we've been through this phase before. It was in like the early 90s. We kind of we went through this, and then everyone just kind of said, like pretty quickly. Everyone's kind of like got over it. But now it's just dominating the conversation.
A few things, I think. The change in technology is really at the root of all of them. So if I just point my finger and say the internet, it's a cheap way to explain it, but it really, why is it this time and not the other times? The internet is a really big factor in that. The geopolitical environment we find ourselves in is another big element of that. So the internet, for example, enables people to reorganize and share ideas not merely by facts of geography or accidents, if you will, of geography, but rather you can go online and find literally a group. And if all the people who want to find a particular group or way of thinking were to try to start finding each other, you can almost imagine it like we're building countries online, but instead of having geographic borders that bring us together and even shared sets of customs, it's now that people are unifying around ideologies. And so it's much easier to find a sympathetic group of people around you, even when you don't live near sympathetic people, which enables a lot of ideology building and the ability to feel connected and not alone, and to not succumb to pressures that your local community might have on you. It also allows, of course, sharing ideas. It has enabled, for some reason or another, the internet in its early phase where it's gone, which is now, and it's gone into commerce, is strongly selected in the information economy for edgemanship and trolling and things like, just being edgy and even absolutely ridiculous and crazy brinkmanship and stuff. We haven't figured out yet as a maybe a species, but certainly as a society, how to deal with the fact that stuff that gets attention, and on the internet, that means it can go viral and become very popular, very influential right away. Another is that we're now a couple of decades in on cable news, which has the habit of postmodern deconstructing everything through constant interpretation. You have 7, 8, 9 different constant news channels all the time that take every event and talk about it till you can't possibly care about it, and every one of them's throwing their own spin and agenda on it. So if you even just watch 2 or 3 of them, it's impossible to have a clear and coherent idea of what's going on. This is all a very different environment. Geopolitically, we have the death of the neoconservative political regime in America that was the political fruit of the Reagan through George W. Bush era. And so Obama came in, and that era hadn't quite died out, but everybody kind of hated it and nobody knew what to do. And Obama was not successful at ushering in a new era. And Trump has come along and is representative of some completely different new era that probably won't stick because it's overwhelmingly unstable and not popular. So it's unclear. We don't have like that we don't have a competing meta narrative, a grand unifying vision of, oh, this is where we're going as a society. It's kind of this warring narratives period, if you will, or warring states period as kind of a metaphor, where you have all these little tribes built up on the internet that believe different things and consume different media and hate different people. And there's no kind of thing that puts people together that lets them look at this stuff and say, yeah. Another was, of course, I think that 2015, it was not insignificant that Black Lives Matter blew up out of the shooting in St. Louis and others. So you had this kind of pattern of apparently racially motivated injustices that finally hit a boiling point, which may have come up because of political issues. It may have been so tense and all this. But at any rate, we've had decades of things changing because of our media environment and because of the geopolitical changes. And then people started to be desperate for an explanation, and critical theory has been cooking one up for a long time that kind of fits. And it kind of fits and stokes certain grievances. And so when you hit people who are looking for that, it catches on big time. And it did catch on big time. Not probably least because it's been kind of stock educational theory for getting on a couple of decades now too. So everybody's been kind of getting fed this stuff by graduates of those professors from the 90s who were still teaching it, regardless of whether or not everybody else turned away from it. There's a lot that goes into it. I would even say, for example, that the self-esteem movement, which was huge in education and child parenting and child development, holds a lot of reasons for it, because this is such a movement that's centered on people not being able to deal with hurt feelings. And why can't they deal with hurt feelings? Well, they haven't bounced their feelings off of reality enough. I mean, the stuff that's coming out right now about resilience or anti-resilience in children due to the self-esteem stuff is really, really scary, and it's really worth paying attention to. But we've, for about 20 or 30 years, basically raised kids to be pretty fragile around things that hurt their feelings, and to indulge outrage, and to find other people with whom they can indulge outrage and work on vectors of victimhood. Of course, just the fact that you can now go online and whip up a angry mob online and have real world effects that make it worth doing is another element of that. So there's a lot of changes, some of which, it's like, oh, we're in a cranky transition phase because of new technology, and some of which are, whoops, we did some stupid stuff, and kind of have to live with it now. I think have led to this blowing up and catching on. There's a lot going on behind it.
Well, maybe we should define critical theory, because I know a lot of people hear the word critical theory and they think you're saying critical thinking, which couldn't be further from what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And this can get pretty deep. I'll try not to, but I've learned a little bit more about critical theory recently. So up until fairly recently, I would have just told you that critical and theory are each combined mean something, or each of the two words means something very specific, that is not what people tend to think they mean. Theory in this case refers to social theorizing. It does not refer to the way that scientists use the word theory to say that it's a well-developed and tested model that explains a wide variety of phenomena and has survived many attempts to discredit it and has good predictive power, et cetera. It is social theorizing. In other words, it is armchair philosophy done about social issues.
Navel gazing.
It is, in a sense, yeah. And critical very literally means complaining about things in order to make the problems in them more visible to other people so that political change can happen around them. So critical in this sense is not critical in the sense of the way normal people use it, which is to be skeptical and to try to use carefully reasoned methods and logic to do something. This is critical in the sense of critiquing, and it is specifically critiquing elements of society and culture such that there's a desire to make problems within them, in particular oppression, that's the theory part, visible so that productive political change around that problem can be made. The roots of critical theory actually go back to what's called the Frankfurt School, and these were Marxists, if I'm not mistaken, who were pointing out the flaws in capitalist society in order to help affect the Marxist revolution. They were going to criticize, they were going to use theoretical explanations to criticize capitalist structures in society such that their problems would become more visible, and it would cause the proletariat to want to overthrow the capitalist class. That, of course, didn't work out. Socialism was tried pretty extensively through the 20th century and was an abject and horrifying failure everywhere it was tried. So it didn't go really well. And in the 50s going into the 60s, the kind of the postmodern take on this arose, and they changed their view very explicitly from the view that the Marxists had and other materialist critical theorists had coming out of, say, the Frankfurt School, was that you have powerful people in society and the capitalist class, or for whatever, for example, and they are intentionally putting control upon or misleading into false consciousness the people that they're oppressing. And that seems not to be a hypothesis that holds water. And so it has been replaced with this postmodern conception instead, that the power is not this kind of like weight pressing down from above. It is a thing that is infused into society by the very ways we talk about things and expect people to be. So it's a societal systemic thing. And so in the 60s and 50s, really a little bit, but mostly the 60s and 70s, following very heavily from theorists like Michel Foucault, you had this change in view to where power is something that automatically is working through society kind of everywhere. and it is something we all participate in various ways. And that's it's different from this weight from above. And so now it opened up this whole door to a new kind of criticism, where the whole point is to start picking apart everything in society. And that's where postmodern deconstruction comes from, to figure out where all of the pieces of this all-pervasive power grid are going wrong. So critical theory is actually looking at society through that lens and with that purpose. And what we're talking about when we say critical theory now is not the Frankfurt School or Marxist type stuff. It is very, very specifically this postmodern adaptation of it that usually drops the word critical and just calls itself theory, and then still spawns off tons of subjects that call themselves critical something or another studies, critical dietetic studies, critical nutrition studies, critical science studies. And we can go on and on and on, critical everything studies, because it's possible to create this for everything. And what that means is complaining about the thing that's in between critical and studies in a way that leads you to try to change it politically.
So it seems like that's where you're getting the most pushback, is this whole idea on things like science. Like science was developed so we would all be able to have like some objective way to look at the world. So I don't necessarily see how you could problematize science. I understand it somewhat.
Oh, it's easy.
Yeah, but that's what's scary though. Like I can understand
the thing is,
it in
it's
art,
easy to
but
problematize everything, and that is why it's so scary. But yeah, you can problematize science. Of course, you start the first step to problematizing science is not to understand it. That's the first step in everything that's going on with critical theory. It's to have an extremely superficial understanding and to have essentially barely engaged at all with the way that scientists think and operate, or philosophers of science have articulated and described what's going on in the scientific process. In particular, because critical theory proceeds from the assumption that the power imbalances and unfairness and injustices are present, and that it takes this critical process to evoke them, to make them visible so that people will want to change them. And so it assumes that the problems are there and then looks for them. And one of the tools I used to do that is called close reading. So for example, you might try to go read, this was famous for the science studies, feminist science studies in the 1980s. You might try to go read Francis Bacon's descriptions of science at the very outset. Of course, this is so long ago that people don't think about science nearly the same way. This is the very introduction of the idea. But their thought is, if you bake these bad ideas into the system, then they're always there and going to reproduce themselves endlessly and be used to do terrible things. And so they look back, and instead of reading Bacon to understand what he's talking about, they focus in on these 2 sentences that he wrote where he says that it's something like a marriage and the husband is extracting resources from the wife, or some horrible thing that we wouldn't think is great now. And it's just an awkward metaphor that he made. And so that close reading of Bacon, rather than paying attention to what he's actually trying to convey or express, you see, aha, there's the hidden oppression that was power that was baked into the system, the hidden assumptions and biases, and those must pervade the entire system. You see this all the time now, though, with feminist and intersectional media studies. So over Christmas, this is one of my favorite examples of it, is that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer claymation from the 50s. Like there was some stupid article problematizing that and talking about how it's full of problematic elements, like a mean and overbearing dad who doesn't tolerate difference and all this other crap. And it's like, that all these little points that they raise, if you go look up the video or the article that they made about it, talking about all the problems with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or whichever other thing, they all come from a close reading that ignores the overall theme that the damn movie was about, and a person who's being unfairly bullied for an immutable characteristic, racist, and treated badly for it, and finds a way to overcome it. It's like literally a social justice movie if you look at the theme of the whole thing, but it has these little problems with how it presents it according to a modern eye, and therefore the whole thing is problematic through close reading. So, it's easy to problematize things if you start with misunderstanding it and then use tools like close reading as opposed to trying to understand the general thrust in a big picture sense. And that's really how they proceed.
So you said bad ideas. I'm wondering if all these bad ideas relate back to some kind of power imbalance. Like, is that really what they're after? Is just seeking out power imbalances and kind of like dealing with them? Because a lot of times it feels like they're really, they're trying to gain power in a system. At the same time that they're trying to like flatten the hierarchy. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
So yes and no. So Foucault was very aware of the problem you're talking about, and he actually wrote about it and talked about how he was very pessimistic in the sense that there's basically no sense in overthrowing power, because when you overthrow power, you replace it with new power, and then the whole problem starts over again in a different way, except it's not quite so, this generation, that generation, very cut and dry. It's power evolves from one area to another. And so a second wave of theorists coming through the 1980s and early 1990s that we have started to call the applied postmodernists actually very actively took apart the original postmodernism in terms of that. So you have critical race scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw and black feminists like bell hooks, and you have queer theorists like Judith Butler, for example, who were steeped in these postmodern ideas and wanted to make use of various postmodern ideas, but who were very, very quick to point out how important it is not to deconstruct the power imbalances that have been as they are. You want to deconstruct the discourses that produce them, but they had ultimately an agenda to say that identity works out to be real, objectively real, and oppression based on identity is objectively real. And then they started very actively cooking the books such that the power dynamics that they describe in society are permanent and intractable, and therefore no matter, even if they seem to have power, they don't actually have power. They're still at the behest of dominance that is holding them down. And it's a really kind of odd thing, because it stands in opposition to the very simple understanding that if you overthrow power, usually you also become powerful, or some other powerful thing comes in and fills the void. But Foucault observed, but they went out of their way, for instance, to say that Foucault can only say that because of his position as a white man who therefore has power in society and privilege that he wasn't able to recognize, and was speaking from that position. They went out of their way, for example, to perform research justice, as it's called, and to actively avoid citing Foucault and instead cite people in their own camps who operated working on Foucault, but did not, but may or may not have cited Foucault. So you might have, for example, Patricia Hill Collins, black feminist in the late 80s and 90s that was extremely influential, coined the term matrix of domination to describe the intersectional reality of our world. And you had a bevy of scholars that came afterwards who pointed out that, yeah, the ideas that she's talking about are ultimately Foucault, and you could appeal to Foucault or cite Foucault, but that would be not intersectional, because the correct thing to do would be to cite Patricia Hill Collins as a black feminist woman, to elevate her instead of citing the white man, Michel Foucault. And you even find places where they're teetering right on the edge of explicitly saying that they should write the privileged white men out of the history of their ideas. So, yeah, they went along. They took some pretty serious strides to make it so that the oppression that they try to talk about, the power dynamics they try to talk about, are effectively permanent, and that as long as that remains convincing, which is another reason I don't think this has long in the world, as long as that remains convincing, then you have kind of an unfettered access to exploit the power that you're developing. But the second people catch on to what you're doing, they're going to reject it. And I think that's kind of what we're starting to see happen in the past year or two.
Sitch, I have a bunch of.
Are,
go ahead, Sitch. Yeah.
Do you think things are actually getting better? Because I don't know. It just seems like everything's getting more divided.
No, I think so. They're not getting better yet, but the necessary changes that will lead to them getting better have begun. If you think of society as a big giant ship that turns very slowly, it hasn't turned yet, but somebody turned the wheel and the rudder is pointing in a different direction. And so I think we'll get worse before it gets better. Another analogy, I don't know how good either of these analogies are, but another analogy would be like when you get the flu, the first 24 hours you have the flu, you are infected, you are contagious, and you have no symptoms because the flu actually works under the radar of your immune system for a little while. And then all of a sudden you start to develop symptoms. And in fact, you develop them really quickly as your immune system kicks in, and then you feel awful. And so what I think is starting to happen now is that the immune system is kicking in. And if we're really going to draw the flu analogy out, we should hope that the immune system response doesn't kill us, because that is the number one reason people die of the flu, is that the immune system response is too intense and does kill people, not the flu itself, right, but rather the immune response to it. So I think the immune system response has begun, and a lot of the manifestations of what people are calling clown world, which we should call by a more formal name like absurdist nihilism, are indicative of an immune response that hopefully doesn't run amok and kill the patient, which would be really Western society.
Sitch, I have a bunch of questions, but I feel like I'm dominating this conversation. So,
no, I mean, I'm worried because, as you're saying that there's all these, you can study anything with critical theory, and there's all these classes and graduate programs about this stuff, and it's like all these people are getting these degrees, and as you were saying, they have to exist in this perpetual state of victimization because that's their job. I mean, that's where all these online publications, like Vox and Slate and all this stuff, they just dredge up these people that got these useless degrees who don't really want to do real work, because it's not even like they're not going out there conducting real studies. It's just, as you were saying, so it's like this armchair sociology. So I'm wondering what's going to happen to this wave of people and students that have, no job experience and no practical skills with the world. What are they going to do with all this hatred that's boiling up inside of them?
Yeah, that's a problem. I don't know. I think that what's going to happen, they are a relatively small proportion of the population at large. Surveys are showing it's probably 8% or less of the population at large in the US anyway, that are in that category. And as a lot of other academics point out, the departments like gender studies, et cetera, are only putting out a few thousand graduates per year, as opposed to something like 500,000 graduates overall per year in the US in all majors. So they do represent a relatively small proportion. What I'm noticing is that not only are you seeing a massive resistance to this coming from the right wing or even the kind of undecided middle, you are seeing even the left, what would maybe be described as a center left or a more reasonable left, no matter how far left their politics are, that are saying. So I get asked again and again, for example, I'm a liberal. I believe that there are real issues around racism and sexism and social justice matters, but the social justice warriors are doing it wrong. They go too far. What do? I get asked that all the time now. I have friends across the political spectrum. When I get together with my friends who are on the left, they are very consistently saying things like that they've had enough of that. They've had enough of this animosity. They've had enough of the craziness. So I think what you're going to see is more and more people are going to turn on it. And as more and more people turn on it, the proportion of them will become smaller. As to what happens with those people who have made their careers into this, that's very unclear. And it's not likely to be pretty or comfortable. And you will probably see their death throes coming out and being fairly ugly. And they'll probably end up occupying little niche sectors that go on complaining more or less forever. happens kind of with everything, though. And like you said, you're worried that you can critical theory anything, and I will point out that it's particularly seductive. But you can kind of Jesus anything too if you want to get into the religious thing. And the difference is people, when they see somebody putting a religious spin on something, whether it's, I said Jesus, so Christianity, whether it's Christianity, whether it's some other religion, it doesn't matter. When they see it, they kind of know it. And they're like, I know what you're doing here. The trick is that people haven't caught on, and I think they are catching on when people do the problematizing thing, that they're doing this kind of like religious looking thing. And it's like, oh, I know what you're doing. Yeah, I'm good for you. I'm not a bad person because I don't believe your religion.
It's comforting to hear, especially the numbers are so low. Because I mean, even, myself and Adam, we get kind of sucked into our own bubbles of like, oh my God, the social justice stuff is like this wave that's just gonna crash across the country. But so it's good to hear that things are not anywhere near as bad as
it is crashing across the country. But
okay,
I don't think that there's another wave behind it.
Right, I understand.
So
one and done.
I think, well, as you said, in the 90s, there was one. Most people don't know that there was a pretty hefty push just before 2010, particularly in the evangelical churches. I've only recently started looking into how this has impacted the evangelical churches over the years. And there was a healthy push to institute what we would now call woke, but they didn't, theology through, say, like the Southern Baptist Convention in 2010. And
really? That's very surprising.
Yeah.
So that was dealing with race or
waves of this already. I don't think that, and there will probably be similar things that happen again later, but I don't think the critical theory is going to remain. I mean, maybe I'm a fool. I don't think it's going to be particularly seductive much longer. And I think people are starting to see it as being kind of poisonous, but a lot of people still do it. So it's hard to say.
Just to double back to the introducing it into churches, is that like a race thing? You said like introducing woke. So they.
Oh yeah, totally. It's right now. It's critical race theory. It was more post-colonial theory in 2010. So they would talk about a post-colonial theology that talked about it was coincide with a lot of outreach into like Africa and South America and things, and trying to build their churches abroad. And so you had this whole. What they do is they build a parallel thing, like critical nutrition studies is parallel to nutrition studies, and they try to give it legitimacy. And then all of a sudden you have one with an adjective, critical, and one without it. Or in this case, you have post-colonial theology, you have critical race theology, which is ascendant right now in the Southern Baptist Convention, very, very, very prominently ascendant, where it's like, racism is our greatest sin. It's the mark of our original sin and blah, blah, blah. And it's really infusing into the critical race theory is the big one now. So you have critical race theology, post-colonial theology, queer theology. Maybe I saw that thing on Twitter yesterday. Probably less of that one in the Southern Baptist Convention. And then you have plain old theology, which they try to connote as being chauvinist in nature or status quo or patriarchal or some anti whatever the woke object is. So you have the socially good ones versus the old style bad one, and then it's wild how they do this. And so right now you have critical race theory pushing in 2010. It was mostly post-colonial theory, and the bid right now, I think, is proving quite successful, which is scary for those churches. As for what that will do to political voting blocks in the country, I don't know. It'd be very interesting to have a large number of woke conservatives, evangelical, religious. I don't know how these people vote.
It seems like an oxymoron.
Yeah, how's that possible?
Because it's possible because it all manipulates guilt. The theology twists your guilt. You're born a sinner, you're all this stuff. And then this critical race theory twists your guilt. You were born into a racist system that, as Robin DiAngelo has said, nobody is bad, but nobody is neutral. And so it's like really easy to start problematizing yourself and go into the whole white guilt thing. And anything that's twisting that kind of emotional vulnerability, in this case, guilt, is really easy to seep in. So philosophically, I think that's how it's possible. And I mean, you can check it out. There are a whole bunch of preachers now talking about critical race theory.
That's crazy. You'd mentioned in another interview, and this actually seemed kind of like a ray of light to me as well, that you had tried to hoax psychology journals and sociology journals, and you couldn't get any papers in those journals, which made me think, okay, well, maybe psychology and sociology is somewhat safe. I mean, we recently had the APA come out with, the how to deal with male patients. It seemed very like critical. Toxic masculinity.
Oh, that was bad. That one was bad, actually. I went through the references on that, and there's a lot of overlap, I'll say, between the references they cited and the references we cited to write our papers.
Oh, really?
Oh, no.
So did you just hit the wrong journals and you probably could have done it, or maybe it's not a ray of light?
Maybe. No. So I think that, so you want to think of grievance studies not as like disciplines. So not like gender studies is a grievance study. I mean, it's a kind of a fair way to look at it in some cases, but it's not really what's going on. You want to think of it as a set of methods. It's an approach to knowledge, and so psychology and sociology as disciplines have a variety of things that are going on within them, but many of those things are more rigorous and require statistics and actual experiments and things like that, whereas they're not just social theorizing. And so to penetrate those journals would have required having the ability to mimic more rigorous methods or to produce more rigorous methods. And the amount of time we had didn't allow for that, of course. I think that they are not as infected as your cultural studies or identity studies fields are. Fields like gender studies are pretty much completely overrun with this. That's not to say it's impossible to do rigorous or worthwhile gender studies, even as a form of social philosophy. And in fact, I think we have a need for that that's been destroyed by the fact that everything has to accord with postmodern theory if it's going to be publishable there. But in psychology and in sociology, to varying degrees that I can't put numbers on, but I have guesses, that they're both roughly a third corrupted by these methods. You have other things going on that kind of tether the thing to reality more, and they make it more attendant with rigor. They do have that whole replication crisis thing going on, though, which is not good for them. Some of that is probably related, or as the grievance scholars would say, co-constituted with the problem that we're talking about, where you have this desirability to prove certain social effects are occurring, or certain ideas are valid descriptions, or theories are valid descriptions of how society works or people work. And so those biases creep into how the science is done. But overall, I don't think that they're nearly as corrupted as these fields in the humanities that are just social theorizing. So it's ugly and not hopeless. And what we've found, although most won't say it publicly yet, a few will, is that sociologists and psychologists who don't agree with the critical theory approach are fairly aghast to be so closely associated with this, and are starting to try to make something of a stand for their disciplines. And I hope that they do more of that. If I were a sociologist, I know that I would be absolutely highly motivated to try to rescue the reputation of my discipline by improving standards and taking action to improve standards, rather than wallowing in this, or even getting mad at us as the people who perpetrated this whistleblowing operation.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That's one of the reasons why I think we need to conceptualize it as an audit, because I mean, if we're going to deal with the type of problems that we're talking about, legitimately deal with them, I feel like we need psychology and sociology. Like, those are the tools that we actually need. The scientific rigor in both of those fields has to be good.
Right. I think we also need stuff like gender studies and even race studies that are being done responsibly, that are rigorous philosophy, interdisciplinary philosophy efforts to make sense of those findings that you would get from rigorous sociology, rigorous psychology, matching that with evolutionary biology, where and when it applies, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have a need for good and rigorous studies of cultural phenomena, and sadly we're not getting those. And we also have need for good rigorous sociology and psychology that is in anthropology and so on, and biology, that are informing these fields. And what we need the least of is fields like critical nutrition studies or critical nursing or something like that, trying to misinform established fields, particularly in medicine or law or education, where the effects that they have are going to be truly outsized.
I feel like some of those fields are just a way for artist types to get a degree that sounds science-y. Like, I honestly,
There's probably some truth to that. There's another horrifying or sad, or I don't know what it's sad. It's the most pitiful thing. So I'm reading that earlier this summer, I was asked to read the book about critical dietetics, which is in nutrition studies, which is why I brought that up as an example, and review it. And I'm reading through it, and then very early on in the book, they start talking about the history of critical dietetics and why critical dietetics needs to exist and so on. And they start mentioning how they were writing these papers, basically complaining in order to affect political change. They were writing critical dietetics papers, submitting them to dietetics journals, and then the journal editors would write back and say, this isn't dietetics. They couldn't get their papers published. And then you have other cases where, you know, they talk about how they turned to critical methods after they tried to establish a career, and they wanted to use other ways of knowing as part of their career, and they couldn't make their careers take off, and that's a result of unfairness. And so there's a certain level where you try to be generous and charitable, but you look at it and you say, these are people who couldn't hack it, who are now complaining about the thing they couldn't make it in, and trying to tear it down because they're trying to find a way in that happens to tear it down because they weren't able to get in, almost like, you know, academic sour grapes or something.
On the gender studies thing too, I agree with you that it would be helpful to have something like gender studies that had scientific rigor in it, but it seems to me like the gender studies we have today is actively denying all the things that would be useful in gender studies, like, you know, biological sex differences and things like that.
Yep, they have adopted an entirely social constructivist approach, which sees that the relevant objects of their study are social constructs, let me actually talk about that for a second. They're to be seen as social constructs. So everything just about has a social construct associated with it. So we can talk about dentistry, for example, and there's a science to dentistry and how they do with the teeth and all the different things that they do. And then there's the social constructs around dentistry, what we think about the dentist, how we feel about going to the dentist, why we make dentist jokes the way that we do, for, you know, tropes about dentistry, etc., the way that dentists act, behave, dress, and so on, which maybe kind of crosses over with professional conduct, which is not necessarily a social construct, or maybe it is, I don't know. So you have this kind of, you have the thing, and then you have ways to talk about the thing and ways to act around the thing that are the social constructs. And it's not crazy to talk about those necessarily. But what's crazy is to be radically socially constructivist, which is to say that that's really all that matters. The realities will shape themselves around how we discuss things. Therefore, we have to put all of our attention and effort into how we talk about things and how we discuss things. And reality will shape itself accordingly if we create change. Therefore, you see the overwhelming drive to control discourses, which is to say, affect censorship and police how people speak about things, because they're trying to control the discourses, and then that will shape reality. So radical constructivism and social constructivism actually sometimes, with like in gender studies, gets so confused that it outright denies that biology exists, or pays it only the slightest lip service in order to not sound like utter fools. And at that point, where you're talking about, the balance between how much of what's relevant is socially constructed and how much is biological, how many of the social constructions come up from biology. When you start saying that, it's 95% or more of all of what's relevant, or even 90% of all that's relevant or more is the social constructs, you've probably gone radical on this, or many of them say 100%. So at that point, they've really jumped the shark, and they are only interested in talking about how people talk about things and controlling speech, language, behavior, representation, portrayal, etc., around those things, so that then they can shape those discourses, which the postmodern philosophy believes discourses define our experience of reality. They define what we consider to be knowledge, and therefore they define what is and is not power, and how power is legitimized and enforced in society. So this is a purely postmodern view that they have jumped fully in on, that actually turns out to have, a little bit of merit, which is what makes it seductive, and then is mostly just absolutely ass backwards.
But you're somewhere in the middle, right? You think it's partially like, obviously we create some kind of culture. I mean, we wouldn't be in this predicament if culture wasn't shaping us in some way or other.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And that's the thing about these people is, so constructivists like to create this vision, this very Manichean, us and them vision, that it's social constructions and they say it's biology, but nobody except for a handful of yahoos that very few people pay attention to say it's biology. The dichotomy isn't construction versus biology. It's construction versus some mix of construction and biology that we don't fully understand, but we recognize that both are relevant, and that the constructions themselves are often also at least correlated with, but also likely to be heavily influenced by the underlying biology. And so they create this fake war, us and them war, that's the social constructivists on one side and the biological essentialists on the other side. But no reasonable person actually in the world today is a biological essentialist. Everybody sees that there is some blend. So it's this really disingenuous thing that they're doing by painting it up like that. So when you say that I'm somewhere in the middle, of course I am. Everybody, except for a very small number of people who is not a social constructivist, is somewhere in the middle and recognizes that culture is profoundly relevant in shaping behavior, and that looking at things as social constructions is in fact valuable, so long as you don't jump the shark and forget that they're not the whole story, and that they may, those social constructions may actually have underlying causes, or if not causative, but shaping factors underneath them that are rooted in other things.
Yeah, I would argue that in order for us to have the most positive social outcomes in the social constructionist frame, we have to understand the biology, because really it's culture that's shaping our biology. Like, we get a certain set of behaviors biologically, and then culture comes in and shapes that. So
yeah, there's that interplay, and they're denying the interplay and just want to focus on the social constructions, because they have adopted, even though many would deny it now, thanks to that intrepid work by the scholars, the applied postmodern scholars in the 80s and 90s, doing their research justice and hiding the postmodern roots of what they're doing. They've adopted a postmodern worldview that regards, with regard to language, knowledge, and power. Language, they say, discourses define what is possible to be known and how we know things and what shapes our understandings. And then we behave accordingly to those understandings. And therefore, the discourses shape knowledge and define power. And so everything comes back to change. I think the philosophical term for this is very logocentric, meaning words-centric way of thinking.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. We've talked for about an hour. Sitch, do you have any final questions you want to ask before we let James go?
There's a couple audience questions, but I don't know if we'll talk about them afterward.
I mean, you can hit me up. I'm good to go. I don't want to go back and fight with my computer.
So we've rescued you a bit. You seem to be in a better headspace now. So
I am now. Yeah, don't worry, it'll come back.
This
Okay,
stuff is
so-
fascinating. It's totally fascinating, and you've
Uh,
obviously done the deep dive on it. So, go ahead.
Oh
Sitch.
yeah, it's like I've gone in.
Yeah, do you know anything about it's called BreadTube going on YouTube?
No, I do not know
Okay.
about BreadTube.
Because did you see the article in the New York Times that was saying, YouTube is this dangerous realm radicalizing kids to become, right-wing extremists?
Yes, I did see that. It
Right, and
radicalized me into some hobbies, so the algorithms certainly are able to get you hooked on some things.
yeah, because there's like a new like left-wing version of YouTube that's kind of getting propped up called BreadTube, and it's a lot of the people that you're talking about, kind of the social
Yeah,
justice side, and
Marxists.
the Marxists, some of them, I guess, yeah, are getting together and they're kind of gaining prominence, kind of seemingly out of nowhere on YouTube. So I don't know, maybe that seems like a dark tide of things to come.
I don't know. It's hard to say. I do think that it's likely that internet subcultures are the breeding grounds of very influential philosophies and trends in ways that has never been true before. And I think that this is a topic that has not yet been able to have been studied well. So I don't know about this specific example, but in general, these kinds of things, internet subcultures are something definitely worth keeping an eye on. I know people are starting to pay very close attention following the 2016 election, for example, to the Chan sites and some others that are similar. I don't spend enough time on them to name them, but as in like zero.
If Hillary had won, I feel like a lot of this wouldn't have happened. I feel like so much of this is just a response to Trump winning and people not expecting it.
Yeah, that's complicated. Trump confirms theory, and like I was saying earlier when we were talking, I shouldn't say that Trump confirms theory. Trump is able to be put forth as evidence through theory that makes theory seem very plausible, and
Right.
that for the people who accept theory, they consider it to be, excellent evidence that they've been right all along. And so when you have times of confusion like this, where things are changing, whether that's just due to technology, whether it's due to an unstable political climate, whatever, we're in a phase of very widespread confusion in terms of what's going on at the least. People are always desperate for explanations in those situations. And because explanations give a sense of control, and that's a core human need, is to have a sense of control of the phenomena that you're experiencing. And so people are always looking for explanations. And so when Trump got elected, given so many of his profound stains on his character at a minimum and his behaviors through his campaign and so on, theoreticians were able to put forth, see, we have a society that it's not just that Trump is a boorish guy with possible sexual assault in his past who mocks disabled people and whatever, the whole litany of hates Muslims and all the victim classes and all the racism, blah, blah, blah. It's not just that. It's that a big enough portion of the entire nation voted for him over a clearly competent candidate, whether you like her or not, clearly competent candidate for president, therefore proving that they must at least be tolerant of, which in theory means accept and endorse and be complicit with all of the tenets of these ideas like racism, sexism, anti-Muslim attitudes, blah, 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 down the list. So it certainly has been inflamed tremendously since Trump took office. Although, I'm old enough to remember living in the South in 2009 when Obama took office, and how the blessed Southern conservatives reacted to that. They like to whitewash that one now, but I was there.
Right. I remember Chuck Norris's wife saying there's going to be 1,000 years of darkness if Obama won re-election.
Yeah, 1,000 years of darkness. I mean, the whole thing, man. The right had an apocalyptic meltdown over Obama in 2009, and they're trying to pretend they didn't now. And now the left is having an apocalyptic meltdown and over Trump. So what happens next? I have no idea.
Do you have a Trump theory? Because it seems to me the evidence that they're pointing to, they're saying Trump is evidence that they were right all along. But a lot of people say that Trump is the response to their own behavior. So it seems like their evidence is something that they've provoked.
I lean into, first of all, the camp always that says you can have many factors, all of which are significant at the same time. I would actually lean closer to the backlash than the people are secretly racist. When I say backlash, it's not even just, there are a lot of people who are on the right who did not want somebody like Trump, but just did not want Hillary Clinton more. There were a lot of people, for whatever set of reasons. I would say that the relentless campaign since 1994 against Hillary Clinton by the right had something on right-wing media, had something to do with stoking anti-Hillary attitudes at the highest level of them on the right. It's not to say she was by any means close to a perfect candidate. I said she was competent. I didn't say she was perfect. She's the avatar of neoconservatism on the left, for example, the living embodiment of it. And that regime died with Bush, 12 years ago or something. And so how are you going to elect that? So there are a lot of things that went into it, but I do lean into it was a backlash and a you can't tell me what to do anymore attitude, a statement being made by the right to have elected Trump. And I say that because I do think that in talking to a lot of people on the right, they don't think a lot of these behaviors that he's exhibiting are acceptable, but they find them contextually funny. They don't think it's great that the president is trolling people, but they think that the people he's trolling have had it coming for so long that they deserve it. And so in that sense, he is a strong rebuke of a lot of the stuff that the social justice crowd has been putting out. And a lot of people still see him that way on the right. And I think that there's a lot to that. There are other people who probably the theoreticians aren't too far off the mark, although I don't know if that's the reason that they would have supported. I mean, when you start talking about somebody like David Duke, who's been giving his, unapologetic support for Trump from the beginning, at that point, there are some people who are definitely exactly as the theoreticians are saying. So I think that it's one of those ugly things where there's truth in all of these different pieces, but I would attest. I would say that the strongest of the pieces is that it was a rejection of a number of things by the right. One is the social justice mindset. One is that the whole right-wing populist groundswell for 10, 15 years has been that the government in all forms is corrupt and awful. And so they saw him as coming in as an outsider and being willing to bust the thing up. So just as a deconstructive project against the U.S. government, which they think is corrupt and terrible, as a backlash against the establishment in that sense as well. So it's complicated in a lot of factors, but I would say that the one that puts Trump's election as a reaction to and rejection of social justice is more significant than people on the left give it credit for, and maybe is one of the more significant features of how I got elected.
So you have any closing thoughts, Sitch? Any more questions from the chat?
Yeah, someone had a very complicated, they worded this very complicatedly. So let me try to simplify this. Someone is asking if you believe any of the idea that this kind of social justice stuff is being used for a general ruling class trying to sell the next power consolidation, I think is what they're asking.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. There's definitely like this, we speaking as a social justice person are the culturally elite in this culture, and we should be able to therefore decide whose opinions are and are not correct. And some of that will inevitably involve cynical power grabs for oneself, and some of them are just thinking that they are the elite, and the elite always psychosocially form patterns and behaviors that try to guard their elite status, which, recognizing that and trying to problematize it is a postmodern thing that's not necessarily bad. That's kind of okay to deconstruct. So I do think that some of that's going on. I saw a thing that was very convincing on Twitter, or shared it again a couple of days ago, maybe yesterday, talking about how post-colonial theory is probably very much that. Because, and perhaps you see the same thing in critical race theory, although I haven't tried to dig into it to answer that question. But in post-colonial theory, you have people who often were from the most educated castes in countries like India, for example, that then come to the West and become post-colonial scholars. And so they are able to skate over the fact that they were very high caste or very upper class individuals, and then come and get prestige by kind of selling out their culture with this very hollow theory that if they were really paying attention during the years that they lived abroad, they couldn't possibly believe to be true. And so there's something to that there's a lot of privilege going into the situation. Now, certainly, I've heard enough to say that a lot of people conflate Marxism and postmodernism, but they're really not the same thing. They both use critical theory, but in very different ways and with a different underlying theory behind it. And they have some shared ideas, but
can you iron that out? Can you give us the details on the difference?
The simplest thing to start with is that postmodernism was a reaction to and rejection of modernism, and Marxism was a modernist movement. It was a meta-narrative.
Oh, okay.
If you look at the three meta-narratives that they originally claimed that they were trying to be radically skeptical of in postmodern thinking, it was Christianity. Well, no, not even that. It was Marxism, Christianity, and capitalism. And science got wrapped up in there as well. So these became like the big things that they were doubting. So they were rejecting Marxism, and that the main reason is because, as I was saying a little bit ago, Marxism saw power as something that was foisted, that the power, the elites foisted upon the commoners, like a weight pressing down, whereas like power from above, or having a stranglehold on society. Your boss has a stranglehold on you. The capitalist class has a stranglehold on the workers, and then lies to them and makes them think the wrong thing. That's kind of a very Marxist or materialist point of view. And the postmodernists don't think that. They think that power is mediated in subtle and tricky ways through language, the way that the people who have had power constructed language, not by telling you, oh, this is how you need to know your role, which would be like the power from above, but just by building the language itself in service of maintaining their own power, so that everybody participates in maintaining the system. So it's a very different view. They're not quite the same thing. I lost track of why I was bringing up Marxism at that point now.
Well, we were talking about the difference between postmodernism and Marxism. I know a lot of people say postmodern, neo-Marxist.
Yeah, that's a Jordan Peterson thing, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I know where he's going with it, and I understand kind of a lot of what he means by it, and I get it. And it gets it, as Helen likes to say, it makes our job more difficult rather than easier, because it conflates things that while they have similarities and makes them poignant, it also get very important things wrong about what's going on and how it's going on.
So there is an important distinction.
We were talking about power grabs. The Marxists hate the reason I brought them up, because the Marxists actually hate the postmodernists, and the postmodernists hate the Marxists. That's another reason why they can't possibly be the same thing, because they hate each other. The Marxists, for example, reached out to us and loved our project, to our whistleblowing endeavor, and told us that we were doing a great service. What they see as they see this postmodern stuff, or the social justice stuff, as people. Who is it mostly? It's people that are in who's writing the theory and making the theory and putting it out into activism is this people at like elite institutions, Columbia, Harvard,
gotcha.
Yale.
The bourgeoisie.
They are the bourgeoisie, and that's what the Marxists say, is that this is an attempt by upper middle class bourgeoisie intellectuals to steal the working class away from the left and for themselves. So the Marxists definitely see this as a power grab by the social justice people, and imbuing the of course false consciousness is mostly a Marxist idea, imbuing the people who are out there, the foot soldiers of social justice out there on the streets, with false consciousness about how society works and their state of oppression and why they're oppressed. They're oppressed because of your race rather than you're oppressed because of your economic class. So it's kind of, I mean, it's one of those things where if you're like George Carlin and you're ready to just watch things burn, you sit back and it's really freaking amusing. But when you start thinking about how you're going to untangle it, it's really an ugly mess. But so to whoever asked that question, yeah, there's some element of that. That's, I don't want to give off the impression though that this is a cynical thing where most of the people involved know that they're seizing power. It is, some probably do, and some probably enjoy it or get the dopamine hit off of having power when they abuse it. Certainly that happens in all moralizing, though, not just here. And I think that most of the people that are involved in this, as Christopher Hitchens once said about the evangelical preachers, is that you really are going to struggle to find people who are more sincere and honest in the things that they are claiming to believe than most of these social justice people. And if you understand how the social justice philosophy came to be and came to evolve into what's now social justice activism and scholarship, it's really clear that if you really do believe this stuff, what they're doing unbelievably from the outside makes sense. I mean, it truly, you can start to predict what they're going to do, why they're going to react certain ways to certain things, and so on. Like I said the other day, reparations came up as an issue, big, and it was a hearing in Congress about it the other day. And I said that, I mean, just because I know critical race theory, I know how critical race theory operates. I know what do they call it? It's got a name. It's a theory that no matter, it's something interest theory. That came from Derek Bell, where if white people, for example, or if a dominant class gives a marginalized class rights, opportunities, etc., they did so in their own interests, rather than because it was the right thing to do or to help or whatever else. It was to make themselves look better. And so if we give reparations, say, to the descendants of slavery, it doesn't matter how we do it. I guarantee you, it literally doesn't matter how we do it. Critical race theory will problematize that it happened at all and how it was done. And it will just become more fodder for critical race theory to complain that our society is intractably and irredeemably white supremacist in orientation. It will just be more twisted into more evidence of the problem that they said reparations was supposed to cure. And you see this everywhere they do stuff. It comes up over and over again. They try to do anything. Anybody tries to do anything, and immediately it gets turned back on them, and it wasn't good enough. And it's just absolutely absurd. But it's what would happen.
Is it interest convergence thesis?
I think that is correct.
So you basically can't win.
It is right. It is that you cannot win. They actually, these theories, the applied postmodern theories that we're looking at through social justice, have spent the last couple of decades in particular really cooking the system so that you can't win. Any attempt to win is somehow false.
Isn't that just good politics on some level? I mean, honestly.
That reminds me of people back in a couple of decades ago when Walmart was wrecking small towns, and they were saying, well, isn't it just good business, really? It's like,
oh my God.
Yeah, in one kind of narrow understanding of what constitutes good business. And in this sense, yes, in one narrow sense of how you play politics. If you want to look at politics as a very Machiavellian game. It's a very, very clever strategy. It probably only works for so long. So in the end, it might not be a great strategy past the midterm. But
how do we get past it? Like, if the instinct to go there just because it is such great politics is, I don't know how we avoid that. Like,
you laugh at it.
well,
The whole thing is by manipulating your feelings. And so somebody comes out and says you're a racist, and you know you're not a racist, and you just laugh. That's it. You don't go into introspection about it. You don't try to apologize for it. You just laugh.
So that's easy for you to say you're not inside an institution, but I know your co-author on these audit papers is in a much different situation because his university's not backing him up. So I mean, if we don't have the institutional power on our side, like the whole laughing strategy isn't going to work.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point of the story of the Emperor Has No Clothes, is that somebody who probably is going to get their hand cut off points at the Emperor and laughs, and then everybody else can laugh. Yeah. And so the real point, though, it doesn't obviously work that way. We pointed our hand, we laughed. Everybody's not laughing yet. You actually have to, and this is the mission that we are kind of now on and will be on for the next, I think, few years, is to start building a critical mass, both within the academy and within the general population, that is willing to stand up to this and ignore it or refute it or laugh when it's thrust upon them. And that's how, by getting a critical mass such that where if, somebody speaks up and the bias response team at the university shows up, 50 more people all of a sudden show up and say, no, you overstepped. And the bias response team eventually isn't able to deal with the fact that the prevailing culture rejects the way that they're behaving. It only works when they can punish a relatively small number of people, or they can punish large numbers of people and utterly undermine themselves and their credibility, because that's how you'll watch a school like Evergreen. You'll just watch it collapse. Imagine that they fired 75 faculty members and 74 of them were all guilty of standing up for one who was falsely accused. That place is going down. Yeah. They don't have that kind of power more broadly. And so when you have a critical mass, like if I worked at a university and I knew a fair number of my colleagues would have my back if I stood up against something I thought was unfair or unjust, I wouldn't have a problem standing up for it. It's like in the case that Brett Weinstein found himself in at Evergreen, he was the only one doing it. Yeah. Which is why it's such a remarkable act of courage. And he even had people talking to him in private saying, I wish I could stand with you, but I can't. And so when you build enough of a mass, and it may only be 5 to 10% of the population willing to stand with somebody who's trying to point and laugh, if that's the thing, or reject it or argue against it or criticize it, then people stop being afraid to do so. Right now it's perpetuated by a fear. Like the whole thing. I can tell you how many people have either emailed me, DM on Twitter, talked to me in person, told me we'll do a podcast like this, and then they stop recording and they tell me, please don't tell anyone. We completely support you, but we can't let that be known. And you just need to know there are a lot of secret supporters. I get this all the time. So imagine if all of those people are suddenly let loose and they no longer feel like they have to be secret supporters. They can just support anybody who stands up against this stuff. You build that critical mass, everything changes real fast in the institutions. And then these people don't have anything left because their theory sucks.
Yeah, I always think about this stuff when people on the left say that this isn't really a problem. They think they minimize the problem. And I think, well, all of your opinions are orthodoxy. Like, you're not in a position where you have to self-censor yourself at work. Like you can't even stand with your colleagues when they say something that disagrees with the orthodoxy. So of course you would minimize the problem, but can you imagine being in that situation? Like this is very difficult for a lot of people. So it's funny that the people on the left always talk about empathizing. And I always think, we'll empathize with conservatives just for like 5 minutes here.
Yeah, seriously. I've been subject to a number of attacks for that one over the years.
Yeah, empathizing with the enemy is a crime, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I mean that's in fact it's so stupid because it's like the number one thing we need right now is to, you don't actually have to agree with somebody to have a relationship with them, and
Yes.
that relationship can be friendships, it can be something professional. You can reach across the table, you can shake hands, you can get things done, as Biden just recently had to try to defend himself, saying, with people with whom you agree on very few things of substance. And then this is okay. This is how a liberal society is supposed to function. And so it's like the exact thing we need more of is being able to reach across, make friends with, understand, empathize with people who have different views than we have. Because as I was saying a little bit ago, we're now in this state where we've spent a few years building up like online countries based on ideology, and they're all at war with each other. It's time to start, sending out diplomats and making peace and coalitions and things like that.
They conceptualize a lot of these ideas as kind of a contagion thing, though. This is why the platforming thing is such an issue for them, because they think just having these conversations is letting these ideas into the world and giving them oxygen, and their whole strategy is just to like suffocate their political opposition.
Right. So I'm going to draw your attention back to postmodernism again, which is that the overwhelming centralized belief in the power of discourses to shape knowledge and power. So if there are discussions like this, or if you platform the wrong person even to refute them, their ideas go out, and complicity with those ideas has happened, and people will hear those ideas, and the discourse is not being controlled. It is not being utilized to affect the political ends that you need to affect, and therefore you've done something problematic. And so, yes, that's why you see the suppression of speech. It is all ultimately predicated on a article of faith that the ways we speak about things, discourses, define what we consider to be true and valid, and how power is maintained and spread and shared in society.
So what are you working on now? What do you want to promote or pitch?
So we've got a few things in the works. So I always direct everybody when I talk to anything, they go check out Mike Naina's YouTube channel. Mike Naina is the filmmaker and now collaborator that documented our project. He's been putting up videos on YouTube on his channel. His last name is spelled Nayna. And it's, Mike Naina is his name of his channel. It's got all of the stuff about us that we've got going on or had going on. He's putting up new content. He's building that. It's playing with footage for the purposes of communicating what we're trying to communicate, but also he's building toward putting out a documentary on the subject probably around the turn of the year. So that's going on. Working with him to build content is going on for me. Peter and I are in the final stages getting ready. We have a book we wrote at the same time as we were doing all these other papers. We wrote a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's about something completely different.
A book together or independent?
Yeah, together.
Oh, okay, cool.
No, one book together, co-authors. And so he's the real expert in this. I'm the second fiddle, but so he's taking most of the work on that. But that's coming out in September. So it's a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations. It's supposed to teach people how to effectively communicate across political, moral, religious, whatever divides where they can't communicate well. And what does communicate effectively mean? It means sometimes you just want to have a good conversation. Sometimes you just want to get through Thanksgiving dinner with an insufferable uncle. Sometimes you want to change somebody's mind. Sometimes you want to learn something. Sometimes you want to seek truth together. Whichever one of those goals you identify, which is early in the book, we talk about identifying the goals for the conversation. It's to facilitate having an effective conversation along those lines. So we've got that coming out this fall, the documentary coming out probably over the winter. I'm spending most of my working time right now with Helen, where she and I are writing a book that explains how social justice in terms of scholarship and activism have come to be and how they are fundamentally postmodern. So most of the things I've been talking about with you guys today are tied in with what Helen and I are doing. And that's probably going to come out in the spring. So we've got a busy say 9 to 12 months coming up.
So it sounds like you're going to land on your feet here. That's
On top of, well,
yeah.
I don't know. Hopefully, so far, that's up in the air. We're also building a nonprofit foundation to try to continue and promote more of the work that we're doing and give it some more legs. So hopefully that will be launched before too terribly long as well.
Mike's channel is great. The videos he's been putting out are just awesome. So he's actually going to put together a 2-hour documentary style.
Yeah, feature-length documentary.
Nice.
And try to get it placed in as big of whatever as it can be placed in, given the subject matter.
That's great. It's fascinating. I'm sure people will be interested in it. So do you want to go ahead and end it there, Sitch? Do you have any final questions or?
There's one more question if you want to get to it, or if you
Yeah,
want
go for
to. It's most of the world's religions tap into the suffering of the human condition. Seems like postmodernism does this also, which bodes well for its survival and proliferation.
That is an interesting thing. It's definitely tapping into the idea of suffering. Most of the world's successful religions have given people a positive outlook on how things can go, and so I'm really concerned about how deeply, I want to say pessimistic, but really cynical and paranoid this postmodern stuff is. I mean, it's really, from the outside, it may not look like it, but it's truly a cynical set of ideas, and it's operating on a profound level of paranoia. When your fundamental belief is that the world is operative in terms of systems of power that always corrupt and self-perpetuate themselves, when you have that going on at the core, so that anytime somebody disagrees with your idea, they must be doing so for some cynical motive, you've got some serious paranoia going on about how the world works, and you are very cynical about how society is constructed and why people are doing what they're doing. And so this is a faith, if you will, built on cynicism and paranoia, and I don't see that those have done really well over time. And in fact, there's not a lot to draw there. You know, it's this negative, guilt-ridden thing that's not producing results. It seems to be creating more division everywhere it goes. It seems to be internally fracturing when you look at it. People who get involved in it are paranoid that they're going to step out of line and be smashed all the time. It's really got more in common with these kind of state religions that manifest under totalitarian regimes that then fall apart when the party so if you look at Mao, for example, Maoism didn't die with Mao, but that's because the party in China still exists and still pushes the communist view. But even though it has kind of loosened its grip quite a bit and changed in a lot of ways. But when the central authority falls, typically those religions go right out the window. And these postmodern social justice types are trying to gain authority through institutions, which is, again, a good parallel to Mao. The party took over all the institutions and has maintained it, or to the Catholic Church a long time ago, although Catholic at least tried to be positive sort of about things. Catholic's a very guilty religion. I grew up Catholic. So I don't see it as being something that's got massive staying power once that central authority collapses. Right. If the institutions don't keep supporting it, when the fad of diversity training falls out with businesses, and it will because it's a waste of money, and when the academic institutions, there's enough people standing up against it, I don't see where it keeps and gets its momentum. Even the people that I have that are friends that describe themselves as, quote, liberal as fuck, I've had enough of this social justice warrior bullshit. They say it all the time to me, and they were mad at me when the project first came out, our papers, and now they think it's hilarious. We have people from, Pete got in trouble with the ethics board at Portland State. I have people from ethics boards privately reaching out and saying that what we did is necessary and great, and they laugh their heads off when they think about it. And so it's once the central authority falls, I don't think it's just not a palatable thing. It's right. Negative, it's cynical, it's paranoid, it's mean, It's got a superiority complex.
And there's no path to redemption either.
Constant. It's like redemption by never-ending works is a way you could phrase it, right?
But you're never truly absolved.
Exactly. So you just have to keep working. It's very Sisyphean in that way, and it's not gonna be. Again, I just don't see how just the fact that it's got an orientation toward the downtrodden will be sufficient to keep it in operation for the long haul. It's just nasty. And delusional. I mean, it's just all powers and language, and like your words have magic powers, and if we don't censor everything, bad things are going to happen. I mean, nobody loves that stuff.
It seems like in religion, there is some aspect of hope, even if it is in the afterlife. What aspect? I don't see any aspect of hope in this critical theory as a kind of social religion.
Well, I don't know if there is one. I mean, nominally they would say that they care about trying to create a more just society or a truly just society. They've got this kind of equity utopia built in their minds, or heaven by equity or whatever. But it's the theories themselves are too deeply cynical and too invested in having made the power dynamics permanent features to possibly admit that. So I don't see hope either. The original postmodernism was not hopeful. It was despair. It was nihilism at the failures of our great explanations to rescue mankind from himself. So this kind of pessimistic, cynical despair it really permeates through what's going on. Hope is not one of their core themes.
Well, they need to fix that. They need to find a way to just pack
No,
some
they
hope.
don't. We don't want them to fix it.
You want it all to collapse?
out.
You want these people to die nihilistic, despair-filled?
As long as it goes away. That's all that matters.
Anything else, Sitch?
No, but thanks so much for coming.
Yeah, it was a good talk.
Yeah, we're gonna do another. We're gonna watch a video after this, but we'll cut out this portion, and we'll be sure to include links to Mike's channel, to the stuff that you did, and to your Twitter too. If anyone wants to reach out to James, they can.
Awesome, thanks, guys.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to the book that you're working on with Helen, because I think that's sorely needed for people to really understand what's going on.
I really don't want to oversell the thing, but it's really the thing that everybody's waiting to find out about. Whether it's engaging enough or whatever remains to be seen, but it does answer a hell of a lot of questions about what's going on the left and why, and how it derived from the scholarship in really straight lines from the original postmodernists, and how it evolved to take on a different character over the years. Big time, a couple of big evolutionary steps have occurred. So it'll be a fascinating thing to get out in the world.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Take care, man.
Yeah, you guys too.
Okay, so we have some other. Did he leave? Okay, yeah, okay. We got some other super chats to go through before we start the video. Bastilio for €5 says, "Hello, Sitch, Adam, and James. Thanks for the stream. Love your work. James, keep it up, and keep up the good work as a sidekick, Sitch."
What?
Hashtag Team Adam.
No. They love to belittle you.
No, not happening. Not happening. Hammy227 for $38.68 in Aussie bucks says bloop. Thank you very much for that expensive bloop, Hammy. Let's see. Hallucinate for $2 says Trump is the yin and yang is the yang.
I noticed that one. I was like, yang.
Beautiful.
Yang.
Beautiful. EP for $20. Thank you so much, EP.
You should shout out that we're gonna live stream the debates.
Yeah, that's right. we're going to live stream both Democrat primary debates on this channel.
We're going to be seeing you
while it's happening live, and we'll have Trump's Twitter feed open as well, so we can see what Trump's saying as it's happening. Fabio Cartouche for $10 says, who asked the question earlier about power consolidation, said, no, it's not about power grabs. It's about people who already have power using social justice propaganda to justify further totalitarianization of their power. Laws are being passed on this stuff. I know I agree 100%. I apologize if I mischaracterized your initial question, but I think that is 100% what's going on. I mean, you're always going to have the people in power always going to be looking for the next fad to justify grabbing more power because they're completely cynical about this stuff.
When James was explaining that power dynamic, I thought the only thing that was missing was him talking about it in a Carlos Maza voice when he was talking, when he said, this is, from the social justice perspective, they talk about like, we are the interpreters of society for you. I'm like, if he could just do a Carlos Maza voice, this would be perfect.
How dare that's homophobic, Adam. I don't even know how you could bring that up.
Come on. I do your impersonation when I'm not making fun of you when I do my, hey, now, everybody, Jamal.
Yeah, but I'm not a protected class, okay?
Oh, okay.
Sidekicks are a protected class. So you're a protected class, not me.
Nice. I didn't realize that, but where do I apply for that? Can I talk to YouTube about my channel demonetization?
I'll give you some sidekick dollars.
I am a protected class. Please remonetize my channel.
Ragnar Benzin for $5 says, one of my SJW friends specifically told me no amount of money would ever be enough to repay blacks. Yes, that goes into exactly what James was saying about it. It's this endless cycle of power, victimization that they can never get past, because that's how they get power. That's what these people do for their careers. They can't fix the problem because then they won't have a job.
Reparations also, it seems like the institutional equivalent of the apology that admits guilt. Like it doesn't get you off the hook. It's just they'll come right in and say, yeah, see, you admitted it.
Right. That's what they always do. Yeah, you can't apologize to anything because it's just a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
Stephen Biggs for $1.99 says, I believe in you, Sitch. Adam is the true sidekick. Thank you very much, Stephen.
That is
push
true.
Him back.
That is the truth.
Yes, we all know it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there is no redemption in the SJW ideology at all. And I think that is why it will eventually, guilt only goes so far, because at least guilt in Christianity, it's like, oh, feel guilty, and then here's how you fix it. You follow this path. If you're Catholic, you confess your sins, you believe in Jesus, and here's the reward. Here's the individual reward. Okay, you go to heaven as an individual. But with the social justice stuff, there's no individual reward.
Yeah, I just read this amazing book by Stefan Asma, Why We Need Religion, and he puts forward a therapeutic argument for religion that I don't see in any of the social justice stuff, because I'm like, the religion facilitates so many psychologically helpful behaviors that are just not present in any of the social justice stuff. Like
right.
Perpetual victimhood is not, like, that's not a good way to get ahead. That's not a good way to stay healthy.
Well, also, it's not, I don't know how successful of a power strategy it will be, because it's so self-defeating. It's so self-eating, because it's always going to be, the purity spiral, where the person is going to come to the realization, kind of like what James was saying with the actual Marxist liked the study because they view the SJWs as bourgeoisie.
Yeah,
and
that
I feel
was
like
fascinating.
Exactly. Though it's interesting because I feel like I felt like Ben used to, Ben Burgess, who we talked to, I felt like he used to kind of view it that way, but I've been seeing him get a little cozy with some of these SJW breadtube types. So I don't know, maybe he's coming around.
I saw a talk with him recently that gave me a little bit of hope. So,
oh, really? What do you say?
I can't remember the actual talk, but he wrote an article for Coolette, so he was addressing a Coolette audience, and the audience was giving him some pushback.
Is it Coolette or Quillette?
Quillette.
I don't
sorry.
Okay. I always say it wrong.
I have terrible pronunciation, so.
Carl John.
Quillette.
Non-Vita Rex for $5 says, plot twist, you're both sidekicks.
Nice.
Bum, bum,
Sidekicks of who? Who's our hero?
Jordan
Today.
Peterson.
Yeah, no, because we had James
Jordan
on.
Peterson.
Yeah.
Fabio Cartouche for another $5 says, or seeding the next fad through their revolving door, mainstream media propaganda apparatus. I guess I'm more slightly cynical than you. I don't know if it's a question of cynicism. Well, I guess it sounds like, I mean, I don't want to mischaracterize you again, but I don't think that the people in power are smart enough to come up with the next fad. I mean, you look at all the marketing, departments and all these analytical departments. They're always trying to figure out the next fad to sell it for money, and it feels like it never works. It's very rare that it works. So I don't think they're creating fads for this revolving door as much as I don't even think they're really seeding the ground for the fads, because I don't think most of these people have the foresight to see that far. I think it's easier for them to just sit back and wait for the fads to kind of prop up, and then they just jump onto it.
Yeah. Once it materializes, they capitalize on it.
Right. So let's get in. Do you want to get into Big Joel over here?
Yeah, this video's long. Obviously, we're gonna watch 10 seconds of it, and the fascinating thing about this video is you want to lay out his argument? Did you watch the video? You said you got bored and quit.
I got bored, and then when you said you wanted to do part of it, I watched the rest of it.
Oh, okay.
And it was still boring.
It's super boring, but go ahead, lay out his argument.
I have to go to the bathroom real quick, so if you want to lay it out,
okay,
that's fine.
So basically, this guy has an argument that the atheists had a certain kind of strategy when they were developing on YouTube. The skeptic community says this is the death of YouTube skepticism. And he's obviously a social justice type. He's obviously on the feminist side. And he's making the argument that when the skeptics were attacking Christianity, I guess they were doing a better job of it. They were more conscious of what they were doing. But now that they're moving into the feminist realm, that they are doing a very poor job of I guess he's saying that they're straw manning the feminist arguments. And the thing that's funny about this is because he lists in here a bunch of places where the anti-feminists would go if they were attacking the feminist arguments in the same kind of detail that they attacked the atheist arguments. And they're all places that the anti-feminists have gone time and time again. Jordan Peterson is constantly citing the evidence behind this. Like, I built my Think Club channel on Jordan Peterson addressing these arguments and then citing the psychological or sociological studies that back up what Jordan Peterson is saying. So the idea that he goes through here and lists off like half a dozen things that the anti-feminists have never touched on, that we have touched on like a million times, is hilarious. It's like, how are you so in this feminist bubble that you don't see that we are making those arguments? Like, come on, Big Joe, come on, make them to your face.
I think with Joel, I don't know if it's that he's never heard them, or he's trying to attack anti-SJW YouTubers specifically.
Right.
So I don't know. He's probably gonna just say like, oh, it's okay for me to ignore Jordan Peterson because he's not a YouTuber, And besides you and me and some other handful of people, I don't know how many other YouTubers have been going into this stuff specifically that he's asking for.
He's saying Blair White hasn't made Jordan Peterson's arguments.
Basically, yes. He's just criticizing Blair White and saying she represents all anti-SJWs. Right. That's basically what this whole video is. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. He does use a lot of pictures, though, and I think he uses Dave Cullen, and I think Dave Cullen has made pretty much every single argument Jordan Peterson has made.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So, I mean, I don't know who he's talking about here, but
it doesn't matter because his audience isn't going to watch those videos.
No. But do you also think that he's just saying that like we can ignore that they have addressed these arguments because they made them incorrectly, or like we don't agree with their studies. Like I
He's
think,
just doing classic straw man.
yeah, okay, classic straw. So you want to?
I mean,
Are we going to pause it as he makes the argument so we can
yeah.
counter the
But
argument?
right before we get in that, Man Face the World for another $5 says postmodernism redemption comes when all Western hierarchies are destroyed, just like communism is ushered in once capitalism and bourgeoisie classes are destroyed. That's what James was saying too. That they want this kind of hope in the future that they can overturn all the oppression, which I agree with. Here's why I disagree. I agree with that's like the hope aspect, but that's not really the redemption aspect, because redemption has to exist on a personal level.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And that's the difference, is that it's, people can be working towards a better society, overturning the capitalism and bourgeoisie and all that stuff. But that doesn't apply. That's like a class thing. I mean, that's a societal goal. There's no individual goal in how that's going to affect you specifically.
And
it's
there's
kind of just up in the air.
And there's no hope in it because you don't actually know if they succeed or not. Like it's not going to happen in your lifetime. In religion, in Christianity, like all you got to do is die and you get your just rewards. Like
exactly.
it's like the whole idea behind Christianity is, yeah, life sucks, you're oppressed, and the thing is you're going to get paid back in the next life, which gives you the wherewithal to soldier on and do the best that you possibly can in this world. And you might actually succeed if you put your heart into it. Like this is just like give up. Like it may happen and it may not. You may die completely unfulfilled knowing that this mission that you were a part of never succeeded. What a downer is that? Like, how do you sell that to the masses?
Well, that's the thing. I think it's a short sell. I think it'll exist for a while because of all the factors that we were talking about earlier, but it will burn itself out. Yeah. It's unsustainable.
Yes.
Lock Nice for $5 says, suggestion for social justice detective 2, Adam.
Nice. Let's hear it.
Make social justice detective the person hired by VidCon to investigate the Anita Sargon debacle.
That would be good.
Interesting.
I wonder if I can hire Anita. She seems to be looking for a job right now. I might be able to get her cheap. Wonder what her act. I've seen her videos though, and her acting is so.
Oh, I'm just gonna she has the charisma of a plank of wood.
Yeah, maybe I could just cut a plank of wood shaped like her.
Oh, actually, that would be funny. Just have like a board. And
I could put my mouth.
The Anita face.
Cut a little mouth hole. I'll just do the.
Not even. Oh my God. How about, here you go. If you're going to do this, if you're actually going to do this, you have a plank of wood, like Plank from Ed and Eddie, that you put, like, kind of dress up a little bit to look vaguely like Anita. And there's just like a tape recorder taped to it that just says like pre-recorded, nice. like the same 3 things for everything.
Yeah. Everything's sexist. Everything's racist. You just got to point that shit out.
Hire me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Anita was complaining on Twitter about, I don't know, what was it, the Cyberpunk game or something? One of these games she's complaining about, and she was all like literally begging the company on Twitter for them to hire her so she could, tell them how to discuss these issues in their video games on a socially acceptable way. She wants people to fucking pay her for this nonsense.
Why? Well, think of all her unpaid emotional labor. They gotta compensate her for something. I don't like, why would you pay somebody to problematize your video game? Like, Jesus, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
It's absurd. Yeah. Well, she got to make money somehow. And we all know she's burned through all her money with her garbage videos that no one likes anymore. She gets no views. It's interesting because I think she only gained popularity because she was the first one.
Yeah.
But as soon as people started taking up the social justice cause, like people that were a lot better at it than her instantly eclipsed her.
Big Jim here. He's doing good.
Yeah, even though, I mean, I don't know. I don't understand his appeal because he, as I said, his video is real fucking boring. So,
yeah.
He does the kind of H-bomber guy strategy where a lot of his videos are not about politics. They're about movies or whatever. So he kind of suckers them in that way, maybe.
I've been contemplating doing a Colbert style of the doing these types of videos as social justice detective, just because like these things are so ripe for parody. Like it's comical.
You could do that. You could try it. I mean, what do you got to lose?
Comical. Oh yeah, definitely.
Anyway, ready?
Let's do it.
This?
Feminist scholarship, and if it is, would those scholars approach the subject in such a haphazard and punitive way?
Yeah, we just talked about it with James. It's called navel gazing. That's exactly how they approach it.
It's like, yeah, it's like, you know, with when I looked into P plus P equals R, and you find out like there's no research into this, there's no theory, there's not even a theory into that. It's literally just we want to tell white people that they can't be discriminated against.
Yeah, no surveys or anything. It's just hypothetically this is affecting society in this way, and we don't like it.
Well, and it's funny because he makes this whole argument like, oh, the anti-SJWs haven't properly rebutted these theories, the feminist theory. And it's like, wait a minute. Before we can rebut the theory, feminist theory has to like prove itself with science.
Exactly.
They haven't done it. It's was it? I don't remember. I think if James said it, I don't know if he said it just now or if he said it in Joe Rogan. He said none of this stuff is theories. They're just like they're just thesis. They're just hypotheses that they make.
Totally. They never reach the theory stage.
They never reach
because nobody does any freaking research.
Yeah.
No, obviously not. Now, when talking about feminism, these skeptics often just refuse to deal with material beyond the surface level of the subject matter. Like,
do you ever notice how these guys look at their script? Like they must be using some kind of teleprompter.
Oh, I never think about that now.
Do you notice that on like Saturday Night Live where they obviously bring the star in and he hasn't memorized his lines, so half the time he's like looking off screen.
Right.
I've totally spoiled Saturday Night Live for you now. You'll see it all the time.
They probably just have their laptop open. Like across where like right next to where the camera is.
Maybe. But I think it's funny because he is in a sense acting here. Because he's trying to act natural. Like this is just something I thought of when it's really something that he spent 3 weeks writing out.
Right.
When I did my videos, I just off the cuff. Like why are you trying to sound like you come out like a news announcer if you're gonna like why are you trying to sound off the cuff? It's very inauthentic. Come on, we're dunking on this guy, Sitch. You're happy.
Well, it's like, you know, because he's complaining like, oh, they're just reaching the surface level. Like the whole fucking feminist theory is surface level. There's nothing beneath it. It's just all surface level nonsense. Yeah. Like I think it was like last year or something. I asked Chrisiosity, I forget, she actually responded. I said, is there any proof that sexual objectification is real?
Mm-hmm.
And she said yes, and she sent me back these articles. And when I read them, all the articles were about how women feel bad when they see attractive women on video games and TV for having unrealistic beauty standards. And I'm like, wait a minute.
What's that have to do with sexual objectification?
I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about. The idea that men, it's interesting because she immediately goes to women, I immediately go to men. I said, you know, I'm talking about the idea that men see attractive women on movies and TV and then will turn around and treat women in real life like objects. Isn't that the fucking theory?
Yeah.
She didn't respond to that part. So.
She's like, no, it's just about getting sexy girls out of video games so I can sleep at night.
Yeah, basically.
So funny. They're like, I want to be that object. So
that's
bad.
The truth of it. That's a prop. See, it goes. I'm glad that James brought this up because this is something I don't think I've ever talked about it, but I've always been one of my nagging theories is that a lot of this is bred out of a mutated version of the self-esteem movement that was kind of pushed by like a lot of hippiness, which is, you know, oh, you know, you're perfect the way you are. Yeah. You're beautiful. You gotta, you know, build up your child's confidence, even if it's not real.
Yeah, I think that's done a lot of damage to society.
Right. And it totally matches all this stuff because it's like, okay, you know, it used to be you could have a woman I mean, obviously everything's contextual. There's definitely situations where women can be dressed scandally and they don't want to be, and it'll be they'll feel objectified. That's definitely something that happens, but they negate. They ignore that there's also lots of women who dress sexually, and for them it's empowering because they want to be desired. They want to have people look at them and say, "Oh, this was so weird about this thing too. It's like if a guy who's really like buff and works out and everything, he's wearing like a tank top so you can see like his chest and his arms and everything. He's enjoying the people looking at him. Yeah, right. That's why he's wearing the clothing the way he's wearing it.
Yeah, big time.
I mean. Right. So, I mean, it's so obviously when girls are dressed scantily, now this doesn't mean they're asking for if they get raped. Okay. That's obviously straw man. That's where they always go. But obviously if a woman is dressed, in such a way, it's because she wants people to look at her and she gets off on the fact that people are desiring her. Because who wouldn't get off on that?
She wants that power. Yeah. Attention.
Exactly.
We live in an attention economy. She's like, attention. I'll show you how it's done.
Exactly.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no, it's jealousy. It's just jealousy. Yep. That's all it is.
Well, okay, never mind. I don't want to get into the ad homs on the feminists, so we'll keep watching the video.
It's easy to see a bunch of BuzzFeed feminists talking about the wage gap.
How do I deserve to be paid less than you?
In what world does 77 cents equal $1?
And to point out that they're not recognizing that an important factor in that statistic is personal choice.
The wage gap is simply the average earnings of men and women working full-time. It does not count for different job positions, hours worked, or different jobs.
That's a fine point, and it's fun to make. What's harder, though, is to make that argument and then ask the more intricate questions that it demands. Most notably.
No, what's harder is when you ask those intricate questions, nobody listens.
That's true. Well, it's even, this whole thing is very, I don't know if it's purposely disingenuous or just stupid, but it's so BS because the only reason feminists have caved on the idea slightly about the wage gap is because we kept pointing out that they were being dishonest about it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So he's acting like, well, it's fun, like, I don't know. In the beginning of the video, he's acting like, oh, this is something only the BuzzFeed feminists bring up. They're the only ones talking about this. I was like, no, that's fucking Obama signed.
Yeah, no
an
shit.
executive order about this nonsense.
No shit. We're going to watch the debates on this coming week. Like, what are the chances someone says something about the 77 cents?
Oh, very high.
Yeah, very high. Exactly. Come on.
It will. I'm gonna. Okay, wait. Let's throw a prediction. Who will be the candidate that brings up the wage gap?
Oh, probably Elizabeth Warren. Who do we have on the first night? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say Joe Biden.
Oh yeah, he's out of it. He's completely out of it.
He's got to appeal to women, so he's gonna throw out the wage gap.
Oh yeah,
that's my guess.
You think anyone will call him on the hoax? I don't even want to say it because now I'm worried that we're going to get demonetized.
Well, I think, here's the interesting thing. Literally, as soon as I typed in the title of the stream, no, not this title because there's no hoax, but when I typed in the description about the Sokol hoax and the academic hoax or whatever, it immediately demonetized the video.
Oh, really?
But then when I requested a review for the live stream, it instantly remonetized it. So I have no idea.
Yeah.
What's going on with this? So I wouldn't worry about it.
YouTube has us on a leash. We're oppressed.
We're oppressed. That's right.
Why are these decisions getting made? Why are
these decisions getting made?
I'm wondering why he used this terrible font.
Because don't get me started on fonts. Like I could go on an app for an hour about fonts. I think I schooled you for an hour on fonts.
You have, yes. Adams yells at me about the fonts and the shadows and the outlines. I never listen to Adam on the fonts. Maybe I should.
But I gotta tell you, something sunk in because you're insulting this guy's font. So
that's true. It's pretty bad.
Victory.
There you go. I don't even, what was the question he asked?
I can't remember now. It's like, oh, why are these decisions being made? So why do men and women choose different jobs? I think, didn't a famous Google employee write a paper on this subject called Escaping Your Ideological Echo Chamber. Maybe you'd like to read it.
Yeah, this very small incident no one ever heard of, no YouTuber ever covered. What was that guy's name?
What's his name? Oh. Was it James Damore?
Yeah, no, but who's ever heard of James Damore? I mean, I heard that guy.
So there's been some research done into this, Bob. I think you can look it up, okay?
Well, see, it doesn't even have to. He's not even saying that people have to research it. He's just acting like no one talks about it.
They have a study that they've done with frickin' monkeys, okay? Where they give monkeys dolls or trucks to choose from, and the monkeys, like we've been making different decisions since we were monkeys. The male monkeys want to play with the trucks, and the girl monkeys want to play with the dolls. They're What do they call it? Allo parenting?
I don't know what the term is, but
the biological structure of the eye is different in men and women. Men, there's these parvocellular and some other there's like P cells and L cells. And one detects motion and the other detects color and texture.
Right.
And women have a higher proportion of the color and texture cells, and men have a higher proportion of the motion detecting cells. What do you think's going on there? What's happening there? It's like the men back in our history went out and like threw things at animals.
Right.
And natural selection grabbed a hold of this, right?
I think a good way to label social constructionism is to say that they're evolution deniers.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. That's the way I feel now. Like, one of the sad things is, and it even clues into this video here, because he's saying like the atheists had all these great arguments when they were debating theists, but now they have terrible arguments now that they're debating the social justice advocates. It's like, no, we have the same exact arguments. It's like, it's called science.
Well, his theory in this video, which I think is so absurd, is that he's saying the question he asked in the beginning of the video is, how come all these YouTube atheists switch to being anti-SJWs?
Oh yeah, like it's a grip.
Which, first of all, there's lots of YouTube atheists that didn't, so
No.
I don't know how accurate that is. But his answer to this question is just that, oh well, the aesthetic form in which YouTube atheists could make response videos fit perfectly with making response videos to BuzzFeed feminists. Which is like, okay, well, there's also the fact that all those people, they're used to looking at ideologies very critically and not just buying the herd mentality. So when this other ideology comes along, they look at it the same way.
And I mean, that argument that he makes even breaks down, because the bedroom feminists were like Bering's bread and butter. Are you kidding me?
Right, exactly.
It wasn't BuzzFeed feminists that people built their channels on. It was going after these bedroom feminists who were just parroting the BuzzFeed.
Right, that's a great point. And everyone criticized Bering for doing that. They said, "Oh no, you can't. You're punching down. You're not allowed to do that."
Yeah. Yes. What is next?
Are women so often the primary caretaker?
Why are women so often the primary caretakers of children, Adam?
Oh, I don't know. Choice. There are.
It's fun.
Go ahead.
There's this. I love this study, and I hope it gets replicated and put everywhere, like forever. Which is, they said that they found that actually there are significant brain differences between males and females in the womb. Okay,
Oh,
so before they're even born, and that actually as you get older, your brain loses sex differences.
Yeah.
So the younger you are, the more your brain cares about sex differences.
Yeah, it should, right? Because like reproduction happens when you're younger.
Right.
Yeah, and allo parenting happens when you're older.
And and that really shows because the social constructionists, obviously as James said, everything's a mix. Neither of us are biological determinists or anything like that.
No, not at all.
But the social constructionists always like to act like when you see boys and girls playing, and like oftentimes they segregate through gender. And
Big
like,
time.
if you ever had a conversation with a little kid, they often get very focused on what it means to be a boy or a girl, even if you don't bring it up.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever had this experience?
Yeah, definitely.
So it seems to me from all the times, and even memories as myself as a child, I remember when I was like 3, I saw the music video for Beat It with Michael Jackson. And I couldn't conceptualize that Michael Jackson was a man. Because I was like, well, I was like, he has long hair and a high voice. That has to be a woman. Like my brain couldn't put it together.
This is hate speech, what you're saying.
Right, but so what I'm saying, like, this is obviously biological factors at work here.
No,
my
it's
parents are like
true.
liberal
It's totally
as fuck.
true.
They're not pushing this. My mom was like very. If my mom had a girl, she would have like forced tomboyism onto her. She's like, I'm not gonna buy my girl any pink dresses or dolls.
Yeah, that gender neutral parenting, I'm very dubious of that.
Yes,
I mean,
it's not good.
Don't force it on him. And I by all means, I'm not a traditionalist. Like if the guy wants to be the primary caretaker of the kids, like we live in a modern age. There's no problem there. Like if the woman is the breadwinner, that's not a problem. But this idea that because in society more women make that choice than men, there's a problem. Like society is forcing them into that role. No, it's not.
You just let people make the choice, you know. And here's the thing: even if, I mean, obviously there are societal norms that push people in certain directions, and it's like, okay, but people still have the choice whether to follow those norms or not, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And thank goodness we live in a society where we do have those choices.
Takers of children. Why are they underrepresented in STEM fields and overrepresented in various less profitable?
As you said, this is like James Moore talked about all this stuff.
Totally.
Jordan Peterson talks about this so fucking. Every interview, they always ask Jordan Peterson this fucking question.
What about the STEM fields?
And he's like, yeah, we've talked about this. You know, every study they show, you know, whenever they look at men and women working in jobs, if they have less opportunities, like in India or someplace that's not as well off, that the job representation for gender is 50-50 almost. But as soon as you go to like a society that's richer and has more freedoms economically, suddenly the split starts to occur and women and men start separating themselves of their own accord.
Increasingly, yeah.
Increasingly, right.
This also why are they overrepresented in helping professions? Like, let's go back to the monkey study.
I know, it's just it's so bad. But I wouldn't mind them talking about this, but he's acting like no one has answered these questions or even attempted to answer these questions, which is completely untrue.
There are huge mysteries out there, Sitch. This is like this is totally uncovered territory he's discovered.
I don't remember it, but I can probably guarantee you that Sargon has done a video on all this stuff.
I guarantee it. Definitely.
Or that, you know, Aiden Paladin has done like an 2-hour long video on this stuff. I can't imagine that there aren't people that haven't covered this, you know, besides Jordan Peterson and James Moore.
Sargon did a video on the documentary where they talk about the Scandinavian countries and how they're like 85% nurses are women.
Right.
Like the women.
Brainwashed.
They sit around together at lunch. They love it. They're like, why do we want to hang out with a bunch of dudes? Like, we're loving life here. Come on.
And, you know, it's so... Here's the question I want the feminists to answer, okay, is how come women were able to succeed so well right now in the medical fields?
Oh, yeah.
You know, if you look at law school and medical school, you have record number of women are actually beating out men and getting degrees in those fields.
Doctors, veterinarians, psychologists.
Yes. And you look at the literary field, women have completely dominated the literary field. If you ever try to get an agent, it's like 90% of all these agencies are all women. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, how come women were able to succeed in all these fields that were once completely dominated by men, but they can't get into the STEM fields for some reason?
Yeah. They're dominating the fields. Women are more social than men, and they're dominating the fields where that social component of their behavior gives them an advantage.
Yes. Yeah. Or just an interest even.
Yeah, totally. Yep.
helping professions? Why do those professions get less pay to begin with? Is this
You got to do that one in a Jordan Peterson voice, because Jordan Peterson said that like 1,000,000 times.
Why are these fields paid?
Yeah,
less?
why are they paid differently? Because you see, these women like to work in fields that aren't scalable. You see, if you develop a piece of computer code, like that is scalable. See, so you can make more money if something is scalable. That's terrible, Jordan.
That was pretty bad. But he's even questioning. He's saying he's like not even understanding scalability or capitalism.
Oh,
he's
yeah,
even questioning, why are the women's professions, or these helping professions, I guess, are not as scalable as, creating some software or whatever.
Why is capitalism so unfair? That's like his next video, isn't it?
Well, why do you get paid more if the perception is that less people can do your type of work?
Man, it's hilarious. It's so funny.
fully accounted for by biological factors?
Okay. We don't even need him reading it. Is all of this fully accounted for by biological factors?
No, it's a mix.
Yeah, it's a mix, obviously.
We're done.
Is that it? Is this the only?
Is there anyone? There's only a handful of people, I think, that are making a biological determinist argument, and they're usually people who are on the alt-right or are close to that edge. Those are the only people, I think, making a completely biological argument.
Yeah, because it's a bad argument. It's a totally bad argument.
Yes.
But the thing is, you literally have the opposite end of that spectrum is just as bad an argument, but you literally have academics making that argument.
Right.
Which is
academics
crazy.
in quotes.
Oh, yeah. Is there any more on this?
Are women just naturally predisposed toward doing these things? Well, if so, what's your proof of that? And
we already talked about it. A million people have already talked about it.
James Damore cited a bunch of it in his document.
Well, see, it's interesting. He's kind of doing, since he was talking about atheism, he's kind of doing the creationist approach, where he's saying to the atheist, we have a book that says that God created the earth, so it's your responsibility to prove that God didn't create the earth.
He is the creationist in this thing, though.
Right. It's like, wait a minute, you're the one making the claim here, okay? Or the feminist. I don't know if he's making it, but the feminists are the one making the claim without any evidence in the first place. They're doing the whole just, prima facie, on its face, it seems like because of sexism.
Yeah. He used the word proof, which is further than, like, a step further than evidence. He's like, let's not look at your evidence. We want your proof.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm assuming he's speaking colloquially. Not.
No, I think he means it. He wants us to prove it to him.
You think he's right?
If these gender differences are somewhat determined by historical expectations, then we have to ask, what is good in keeping those expectations around?
Do you think we have kept those expectations around? Because I feel like we've fought those expectations for the last 40 years.
Well, see, it's the SJW thing, because like, I feel like liberals in the 60s and 70s were more focused on, the mainstream liberals anyway, were more focused on giving people choice. It was just, if a woman wants to work, she can work. If a woman doesn't want to raise kids, then okay, then don't raise kids. Like, it's all her choice to do that. And then some of the social justice people got mad that not enough women were doing what chose to compete in the man's world, basically. It's exactly the same as the P plus P equals R. It's, you have the civil rights movement occurs, and these fucking social justice people in the 70s are like, wait a minute, civil rights happened and black people are not instantly elevated by society and, the economy to be in the exact same level as white people. Therefore, we have to force change somehow.
They chose incorrectly, and now we have to choose for you.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that totally goes into with their love affair of communism, because that's what it is. It's you chose incorrectly. We're going to choose what's good for you.
It's ironic, too, because they have discovered how capitalism works because of the incentive structure. Because now if a woman applies in a STEM field, like, she's top of the stack. Like 20 guys could apply and one woman applies to any STEM field. And guess who's getting in?
Yep.
They
No, exactly.
so that incentive is driving more women to those STEM fields.
Right, but see, even that shows something even stronger, because if there's this huge incentive for women to be in these fields and they're still like not showing up in these numbers that they want, what does that mean?
Jonathan Haidt in his new book talks about the rowing at some school where Title IX came in and they had to get a female rowing team together, and females are just not interested in rowing. Like that's something they don't want to do.
To be fair, I don't understand why anyone would be interested in
Me
rowing.
Me too. But some guys are evidently massively interested in this rowing, because at the school, the guys literally have to go door to door selling candy bars to have enough money to support their rowing team, right?
Right.
And the women, they're like throwing money at them to like join the group. It is.
They still don't want to do it.
It is the epitome of unfairness. Like you can't look at this and think, wow, this is fair at all. Like it's impossible to think that. But that's the world we live in when you're forced to, when you look at the world and you say the structure of the world is my evidence that things are unfair. Then all of a sudden you have to make things unfair just to change your evidence.
Right. Yep. And so what do you say? So should we advocate against them? I mean, see, here's the problem is that you can advocate for, I guess it's just what I said earlier. Just advocate for choice. If you were just advocating for choice, no one would care except for the crazy people. It's not what they're doing.
Yeah. That was interesting what James said about because it resonated with me, because it's the same thing that we're always talking about. Like we want the left to go back to talking about class and stop pandering about all this race and gender stuff.
It's just like with the stupid AOC bringing up the comparison of the kids in the detention centers to being in concentration camps.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, this is, if you're trying to persuade people to care about kids in detention centers, you get an F, because now the conversation is just dominated by people arguing this stupid point about whether they're concentration camps or not.
Yeah.
But if her goal was to persuade people that she's a politician that people should pay attention to, well, then she gets an A+.
Yeah, and that is her goal.
Yeah, so, but it's the same thing with SJW shit. That's what bothers me, is because I feel like at my core, I try to always approach things as pragmatically as possible. And as soon as the SJW shit started cropping up, I'm like, this is not going to work. It's just going to breed opposition, which is exactly what it's done.
Yeah. Strategy.
Yeah, what is that? Feelings don't care about your strategies, Adam.
Do you think...
Should we
Well, go ahead.
advocate against them? And my purpose here isn't to answer these questions.
Yeah, we know. Yeah, we figured that part out. But if you'd like to come on our show, Big Joe, we would love to have a conversation.
Joel.
With you. Oh, well, Big Joel. Sorry, Joel. We'd love to have a conversation. We'll even let you bring your script so you can read along.
Hey, look, there's nothing wrong with having I cannot, except for these streams. I've talked about this on the stream. I'm really bad at I tried to do the daily videos without a script, and it just doesn't work for me.
It takes practice. Like I wasn't good at it when I started. I mean, I don't know that I'm good at it now, but I'm definitely better than when I started. You just got to knuckle under and do it.
Yeah, that's true. Don't be a pussy, Sitch.
Tim, this is what Tim Pool does. I mean, and he's real good at it. I think you could get good at it.
To refute feminist ideas, these are the questions they have to engage with. And I've watched a lot of these YouTubers, and even
I'm terrified. Oh shit, we have to answer these super hard questions. Oh my god, I'm tearing my hair out over here. Holy shit.
This is always the problem.
We're never going to be able to do this, Sitch.
Well, I mean, it's good for persuasion for his team, but this is the problem in terms of being honest, is that he doesn't, with the exception of Blair White, he's not even providing any examples to who's not talking about what he's saying that we should be talking about.
Oh, it's a parody of our position. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's exact. It's a comedic straw man.
So we're not going to go any further on this video, right? We've covered his bullshit.
I think let me just see where he goes. I don't know.
Say they're arguing against feminism, they never get here. So yes, we have the aesthetic, the pleasant argument, the distinctive community, but the center, the core of
He is saying like the famous they. He's like saying all we're included in that they, Sitch.
I know.
He just said we never get there.
He focuses early in this video too on another straw man, which is that he brings up Blair had made some video where she claimed that a bunch of right-wing YouTubers were not really right-wing. We're just
She's talking about Dave Rubin, right? It's Dave Rubin.
But we're just saying what they were saying for views.
Yeah,
and
Dave Rubin. Why?
Right. So he gets into two problems because one, he's acting like every anti-SJW is right wing, which is obviously not the case.
We have the same goals as this guy. We're
I know. We're conservative. We're basically fascist, right?
We're disaffected liberals.
Yes.
Like there's no way around it.
Well, and it's funny because
it seems like of empathizing with conservatives, so therefore we're like right wing.
It seems like all the people that started in the anti-SJW movement, like at least in the beginning, were all disaffected liberals.
Right.
So, but yeah, we don't have to watch the rest of it. He just goes on into his stupid complaining about Blair White for whatever reason.
Yeah, we just want to make the point that everything that he brought up is totally mentioned, covered dozens of times, debated, counter debated, turned into Jordan Peterson clips.
Right. I mean, I'm sure he could just ask Destiny. I'm sure Destiny's debated these fucking points a million times.
Oh, definitely.
For as much as people don't like Destiny, which I'm not a big fan of him either, at least he engages with people and debates them.
This is why, I mean, I'm tortured over Ben Burgess because I think Ben Burgess won't answer the question of property rights, which I think is the hugest flaw in his argument. But I mean, I agree with him on certain things.
Right.
So, I mean, at least he is engaging with the opposition, Destiny as well. So, I mean, there's so many liberals that are afraid to do that.
Right. Exactly.
Speaking of which, we may or may not have a conversation with David Pakman because, David Pakman has tentatively agreed, but we can't necessarily nail down a topic, so to speak. So,
right, we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, it may or may not happen.
He'll see he'll see us criticizing the Tim Pool stream and say nope.
I don't know that he hasn't seen that already, and I don't know that we were that. I mean, I try to pull my punches. You're constantly. I mean, you're the ad hom king. We know.
Okay. Yeah. You're gaslighting me, Adam. Is that what's happening right now?
I'm gaslighting you. I'm serious.
You're gaslighting me.
I can't. Was it last week? I mean, you were going hard on. We were doing it. Who was?
I was going hard on Carlos Maza. Man, fuck Carlos.
Oh,
Maza.
I know.
Right.
But it's just crazy. I mean, you're just. I mean, you weren't advocating. You weren't advocating milkshaking anyone or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So for anyone who didn't see that Sam Cedar video I put out yesterday or the day before yesterday, it's like so. I'm glad you didn't call. I didn't realize how crazy Sam Cedar was until I saw all his videos where he's advocating for milkshaking and he's straight up advocating for assault while crying that Steven Crowder making fun of Carlos Maza is going to get people to go commit hate crimes.
Sam Cedar is technically a comedian, and I wonder. Well, no, I feel like they default to the haha, it's just a joke. I was just kidding, which is ironic.
You don't think he's serious?
I don't know.
I think he's 100% serious.
Right. I'm just saying that that's a plausible defense for him. He may be serious, and probably is, but I'm just saying that they allow themselves to go forward further than most people because they're trying to get a laugh out of it.
Right.
And I mean, this happens on both sides. It's ironic that, I mean, I guess both sides kind of say, "Oh, haha, you were just joking." They call them on those things, saying, "No,
Well, that
you
was
weren't
the whole
joking."
thing with Crowder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. It's both sides. It's definitely both sides. So, all right, are we going to end it here?
I guess we're going to end it here, guys.
Coolio. We'll see you all on, what is it? Wednesday night, Thursday night.
Yeah, whenever the debates are, we will be on this channel streaming them live.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know if we can pause the actual video or not, which I don't know if that's.
I assume we will. I don't know why we wouldn't be able to.
Because we'll want to jump in, but we'll lag behind the live debate if we do it. So I don't know.
Yeah, but who cares? I mean,
well, I don't know.
If we can't pause it, then it'd be pointless to talk about it.
We want to be able. I can't wait to see Andrew Yang, because this is going to be like the at least the Democrat, the base meeting Andrew Yang.
Right.
Yeah. It's going to be
We'll
cool.
see.
It's going to be cool.
Be exciting.
All right. Thanks for the super chats, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for super chats. I hope you enjoyed it.